I should have known something was wrong the moment my mother smiled at me like that. It wasn't her usual smile, the polite, practiced one she used in front of guests. This one was tighter, almost strained, like she was holding something back. It made my stomach uneasy before she even said a word. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice overly gentle, "we need to talk about your sister's wedding." Of course we did. Everything in our family revolved around Alina. The golden child. The one who always came first, no matter the situation. Her achievements were celebrated like miracles, and her mistakes were quietly erased. Growing up, I had learned to step aside, to be the responsible one, the one who didn't make things harder. So I leaned back in my chair, already bracing myself. "What about it?" My father cleared his throat, staring at the table instead of me. That alone told me this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. "Well," he said slowly, "the guest list has gotten bigger than expected." I nodded. That wasn't surprising. Alina loved attention, and a small wedding was never going to satisfy her. And hotels are very expensive. My mother added quickly, her eyes watching my reaction too closely. There it was. The setup. I folded my arms, waiting. So. They exchanged a glance, silent and practiced, like they had rehearsed this moment. "We were thinking." My mother continued, her tone brightening, "Your penthouse would be perfect." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "My penthouse?" "Yes," she said eagerly. "It's spacious, beautifully decorated. Right in the city. It would make the perfect place for the wedding reception." I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "You want to use my home as a venue, not just use it." My father added quickly. "Think of it as helping the family." Helping the family. That phrase again. It always sounded less like a request and more like an expectation. I stared at them, waiting for some sign that this was a joke. There wasn't one. "You're serious," I said quietly. "Of course we are," my mother replied, her tone sharpening just a little. "Your sister deserves a beautiful wedding, and that requires my home." "Well, yes," she said as if it were obvious. "It's the best option we have. The best option for them. Not for me." I felt something shift inside me, a quiet, steady resistance. "You didn't even ask," I said. "We're asking now," my father said quickly. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "You're telling me what you've already decided." Silence filled the room for a moment before my mother let out a frustrated sigh. "Why are you making this difficult?" she snapped. "It's your sister's wedding. This is what families do for each other." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about love or support. This was about entitlement. "You're not just asking to use my space," I said slowly. "You're expecting me to give it up completely. For weeks." "It's only temporary," she insisted. "With hundreds of guests, staff, decorations, and no privacy," I replied. "It's not a small favor." My father rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking this." "No," I said calmly. "I'm finally thinking about it properly." That's when the guilt started, exactly as I expected. "We've done everything for you," my mother said, her voice trembling with emotion that felt more strategic than real. "We raised you, supported you. And I've repaid every single thing." I interrupted, my voice steady. "Every expense. Every loan I didn't forget." Her expression hardened. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" I asked. She didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. The point was that I had something valuable, something they wanted, and they believed they had a right to it. For years, I had given in. I had stayed quiet, avoided conflict, chosen peace over fairness. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way they didn't even try to respect my space. Maybe it was the assumption that I would say yes without question. Or maybe it was just that I was tired. Tired of being the one who always gave. I took a slow breath, meeting their eyes. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, heavier than I expected. My mother blinked, as if she hadn't heard me properly. My father straightened slightly, his expression tightening. "What do you mean, no?" she asked. "I mean no," I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "You can't use my penthouse." The silence that followed felt different this time. Not uncertain, not negotiable. Final. The pressure didn't stop after that conversation. If anything, it grew heavier, more suffocating, like a storm that refused to pass. At first, it was just my mother. You really hurt your sister, she said over the phone the next morning, her voice thick with disappointment. She cried all night. I closed my eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter. I didn't do anything to her. You refused to help her on the most important day of her life. She snapped. How is that not doing something? I didn't answer. There was no point. In her version of the story, I had already been cast as the villain. Then came my father. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, he said later that evening. It's just a location. Why are you being so stubborn? It's not just a location, I replied. It's my home. He exhaled sharply. You've changed. That one stung more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because of what he meant by it. To him, changed didn't mean stronger or more independent. It meant less obedient, less willing to give in. Maybe I had changed, and maybe that wasn't a bad thing. By the third day, the calls turned into messages. Long ones, emotional ones, manipulative ones. Family should come first. We're all disappointed in you? Is this really the hill you want to die on? I stopped replying. But that didn't stop them. Because soon, it wasn't just my parents anymore. Relatives started reaching out, one by one, like they had all been given the same script. Aren't you ashamed? My aunt said during one call, her tone sharp and judgmental. Refusing your own sister like this. I'm not refusing her, I said calmly. I'm refusing to give up my home. It's the same thing, she shot back. You're choosing a place over your family. No, I was choosing myself, but I knew better than to say that out loud. Another relative messaged me later that night. People are talking. It read. This doesn't look good for you. I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking my phone. Of course people were talking. Because they had only heard one side of the story. The version where I was selfish, ungrateful, cold, and my parents. They weren't correcting it. They were encouraging it. They had turned my boundary into a betrayal. By the time Alina finally called, I already knew how it would go. I don't understand you, she said the moment I picked up. No greeting. No warmth. Just frustration. Why are you doing this to me? I'm not doing anything to you, I replied evenly. You are, she insisted. This is my wedding. My moment. And you're making it about yourself. I almost laughed at that. I said no to one thing, I said. That's it. One thing that would have solved everything, she snapped. Do you know how stressful this has been for me? I stayed quiet. Because I did know. But not in the way she expected. I've already told people about your penthouse. She continued, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me now? There it was. Not stress, not disappointment. Embarrassment. Because her perfect image had been disrupted. Then you shouldn't have promised something that wasn't yours, I said. The silence on the other end was sharp. Then her tone changed. Colder. Harder. Don't forget where you came from, she said quietly. Everything you have is because of this family. My grip on the phone tightened. No. Everything I had I worked for. Late nights. Sacrifices. Years of pushing myself while they barely noticed. And now they wanted to claim it. I'm not discussing this anymore, I said. You're unbelievable, she muttered. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe I'm just done being taken for granted. I ended the call before she could respond. For a moment, the silence in my apartment felt almost too loud. But then something unexpected settled in. Relief, not complete. Not perfect, but enough. Because despite the pressure, the guilt, the judgment, I hadn't changed my answer. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't bending just to keep the peace. The wedding venue was exactly what I expected, grand, expensive, and designed to impress. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft light over rows of perfectly arranged tables. White and gold decorations covered every surface, elegant but almost too polished, like something straight out of a magazine. It was beautiful, but it didn't feel warm. It felt like a performance. I arrived quietly, keeping my head low as I stepped inside. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving. I wasn't officially invited, not really. My mother's last words to me had made that clear enough. Oh, of course you can come, she had said, her tone tight. If you can behave. As if I were the problem. Still, I had come. Because of my grandmother. And because a part of me refused to be pushed out like I didn't belong. The moment I walked further into the hall, I felt it eyes on me. Conversations slowed. Whispers started soft but sharp enough to reach me. That's her. The one who refused. Can you imagine doing that to your own sister? I kept walking, my expression neutral, even as the words settled heavily around me. If this had been a few weeks ago, it would have crushed me. I would have second-guessed myself, wondered if maybe they were right. But now? Now it just confirmed what I already knew. They didn't understand. And they didn't want to. I slipped into a seat near the back, away from the center of attention. From here, I could see everything without being part of it. It felt safer that way. The ceremony began soon after. Music filled the hall, soft and romantic. Guests turned their attention toward the aisle, smiles returning as if nothing had happened. And then Alina appeared. She looked perfect. Of course she did. Her dress shimmered under the lights, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully composed. Every step she took was graceful, measured, like she had practiced it 100 times. For a moment, I felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy. Something more complicated than that. Because I remembered when we were younger, when things weren't so divided between us. When we used to laugh together, share secrets, exist without this constant tension. But those memories felt distant now. Almost like they belonged to someone else. As she reached the altar, she smiled at her fiancé, her eyes softening. The guests sighed collectively, completely absorbed in the moment. From the outside, it was perfect. But as I watched her more closely, I noticed something else. A flicker. A tension behind her smile. Like something wasn't quite right, like she wasn't fully in control. And that thought stayed with me. The ceremony ended with applause, cheers, and the kind of happiness that looks effortless from a distance. People stood, hugging each other, laughing, celebrating. I stayed seated for a moment longer, letting the noise wash over me. Then slowly, I stood and followed the crowd into the reception area. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Louder, brighter, more chaotic. Waiters moved quickly between tables, carrying trays of food and drinks. Guests gathered in small groups, talking, laughing, occasionally glancing in my direction before lowering their voices. I ignored it. Because I hadn't come here for them. I scanned the room, searching for one person. And then I saw her. My grandmother sat near the front, calm and composed, like she existed in a completely different world from everyone else. She wasn't caught up in the noise or the gossip, she simply observed. As if she already knew how everything would unfold. Our eyes met briefly, and she gave me the smallest nod. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. Enough to steady me. Enough to remind me that I wasn't alone in this room, no matter how it felt. I took a quiet breath and moved toward a table, keeping my movements measured, controlled. Whatever was coming next, I had a feeling this night wasn't going to end quietly. The tension in the room didn't break after my words, it thickened. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire reception had been frozen in place, caught between shock and anticipation. My mother's face flushed with anger, her grip tightening around the glass in her hand. She hadn't expected me to push back. Not here. Not in front of everyone. You embarrassed yourself tonight, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned in, eager, watching the scene unfold like it was part of the entertainment. I held her gaze, steady and unshaken. No, I said calmly. You did. A ripple moved through the crowd, soft gasps, exchanged glances, whispers that were no longer quiet. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, he said, his tone low but tense. Sit down. No. I replied, my voice still even. I've spent years sitting down, staying quiet, letting things go. I'm not doing that anymore. My mother laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. Oh, now you've found your voice. Now of all times. Yes, I said simply now. Her expression hardened, her composure slipping just enough to reveal the frustration underneath. This wasn't going the way she planned. I wasn't folding, wasn't apologizing, wasn't playing the role she had written for me. This is exactly what I meant, she said, turning to the guests as if seeking validation. Selfish. Disrespectful. She thinks she's above her own family. Murmurs of agreement followed. Not loud, but present. I could feel the weight of it pressing against me, trying to pull me back into that familiar space of doubt and guilt. But it didn't work this time. Because for the first time, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about truth. It was about control, about keeping me small, manageable, predictable. I don't think I'm above anyone, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I just don't think I should be beneath anyone either. That silenced them again. My father stepped forward, his jaw tight. You're ruining your sister's wedding. No, I said, meeting his eyes. You are. By turning it into this? For a split second? Something flickered in his expression, uncertainty, maybe. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by irritation. Before he could respond, another voice rose. Enough. It wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. The single word carried across the room with a quiet authority that made everyone turn. My grandmother stood near the front, her posture straight, her expression calm but firm. She didn't look angry. She looked certain. And that was far more powerful. My mother stiffened. This doesn't concern you, she said quickly, almost defensively. My grandmother didn't even glance at her right away. Instead, she took a few slow steps forward, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the guests, the tension, the scene that had been created. It concerns me, she said finally, her voice steady, because I've watched this pattern for far too long. A quiet unease settled over the crowd. What pattern? My father asked, though his tone lacked its earlier confidence. The one where truth is twisted, she replied. Where one child is praised no matter what she does, and the other is expected to give, and give, until there's nothing left. No one interrupted her. No one dared. My mother crossed her arms, her expression tightening. You're exaggerating? No, my grandmother said, turning to face her directly now. I'm correcting. Then she reached into her bag. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but it drew every eye in the room. She pulled out a folder. Simple, unassuming. But the way she held it made it feel like something much heavier. What is that? My father asked, a hint of tension creeping into his voice. My grandmother looked at him, then at my mother, and finally at me. The truth, she said. The room fell completely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade, like the entire world was holding its breath. She opened the folder slowly, deliberately, as if giving them one last chance to stop her. They didn't. And somehow I knew. Whatever was inside those papers was about to change everything.